Welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how to make this striped s'mores cake. So it's summertime and it's definitely s'mores season, and I'm recreating this cake that I also made a few years ago. I loved the design, and now that I'm filming my cakes, I really wanted to make a video of this. This cake is made with my go-to chocolate layer cake recipe, and I have made 4 7-inch cake layers. I'm frosting it with a marshmallow buttercream, and to really get that s'mores theme throughout the entire cake, I'm topping this with some crushed graham crackers. And of course, I had to add some toasted marshmallows between the layers. So to do this, I took some mini marshmallows, I sprinkled them on a baking sheet, and I then used my small kitchen torch just to give them a little toast. So you have to be pretty careful because these light on fire pretty easily. But once I had toasted them pretty thoroughly, I spread them on top of those graham crackers. They're a little sticky, but as long as you handle them carefully, you'll eventually get them in place. I then added a pretty generous chocolate ganache drizzle on top of this, and I repeated this process with my remaining cake layers. This cake ends up being pretty tall because I did make 7-inch cake layers, which are pretty thick. If you wanted your cake to be not quite as tall, you could always make 8-inch cake layers, which will make thinner cake layers, or you can also halve my recipe and make only 2 cake layers. Once all of my layers were stacked, I pressed down just to make sure there wasn't any air in between the layers, especially since those mini marshmallows do add a little bit of extra height. I then began to add frosting around the cake to work on my crumb coat. Just like always, I used my large offset spatula just to work the frosting all the way around the cake, and once I had evenly covered it, I then used my bench scraper to get it really smooth. I popped my cake into the freezer for about 5 minutes until that crumb coat was nice and firm to the touch, and I then began adding on my buttercream stripes. So to do this, I'm using 2 piping bags that have been cut to have openings that are the same width, and I'm alternating chocolate buttercream and my marshmallow buttercream. So I'm going all the way up the cake, creating horizontal lines until I reach the top. Next is the moment of truth, when you use your bench scraper to make some nice and slow passes around the cake. So to do this, you don't want to be pulling your bench scraper away a lot. You really want to try to make one continuous motion, and you're going to be removing the excess as you go. So once I had smoothed the sides a couple times around, I then worked on the top and did one more big spin around the cake for good measure. Next, it's time to make the s'mores that are going to go on top of this cake. So I toasted some regular sized marshmallows using my kitchen torch, and I sandwiched this between 2 graham crackers just like a classic s'more. I ended up using about 9 of these mini s'mores, and once they were assembled, I began to work on the chocolate ganache drip. As you guys can see, I did one test drip before I started adding the drips around the entire cake, and it is such a crucial step. It really helps ensure that your ganache is at the right temperature to get beautiful drips. If your ganache is too warm, your drips might run too far down your cake and be a little bit on the thin side. And if your ganache isn't warm enough, you can end up with really short, stubby drips. So it's really important you get that temperature just right. I have an in-depth tutorial where I share all of my tips and tricks on drip cakes, and you can watch it if you click the link in the upper right corner. Next, I piped some really fun ruffles on top of the cake using a large open star tip. So this is a Wilton 1M, but you could use whatever frosting tip you have on hand, or if you have a special favorite tip, you could use that as well. Next, it was time to add on all of the s'mores. So I carefully nestled these on top of the cake and fit as many as I could. And then it was time to cut into this cake. So I used a really large knife since this is such a tall cake, and I cut out a slice that was the size of one of my s'mores. So it ended up being a pretty massive slice, but this cake is really delicious, so I didn't mind. Don't forget, if you want the recipe for this cake, it's up on Chelsweets.com, and I've included the link in the video description below. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, be sure to click the like button, and don't forget to let me know what videos you'd like to see next.